The piano sound echoed through the walls of the practice studio at Juilliard. Alara's fingers glided across the keys with the precision that had brought her here, transforming sheet music into tangible emotions. Tchaikovsky today, Concerto No. 1 in B-flat minor. Her hands seemed to have a life of their own as she closed her eyes, letting herself be transported away from that rehearsal cubicle. The vibration of her cell phone broke the spell. Normally she would ignore it, but something made her stop. How many times did her mother call during rehearsals? Never. This thought was enough for her fingers to abandon the ivory. Alara? It's about your mother. The neighbor's voice sounded distant, as if coming from another world. The following words mixed in a confused haze. Fainting, ambulance, hospital. It took just 3 minutes for all the bright future Alara had fought for to begin to crumble. How long do I have? She asked the doctor 2 days later, already in Boston, watching her mother asleep in the hospital bed, looking smaller and more fragile than she had ever seen her. Dr. Levine adjusted her glasses, looking at the exams on her clipboard. Without treatment, maybe 3 months. She hesitated before continuing. There is an experimental treatment. It's shown promising results in cases like hers. But what? Alara interrupted, clinging to that spark of hope like a castaway to a piece of wood. Insurance doesn't cover it. We're talking $250,000 minimum. $250,000. The amount echoed in Alara's mind like a sentence. What good was being accepted to the country's best music school if she couldn't save the only person who always believed in her? What was the point of playing for imaginary audiences when her mother was wasting away in a hospital bed? That night, after signing the temporary leave from Juilliard, Alara faced her reflection in the hospital bathroom mirror. The green eyes, inherited from her mother, were dull. Her long brown hair, once carefully arranged for recitals, was now tied in a sloppy ponytail. 22 years old and too great a responsibility to carry alone. I'll find a way, she promised upon returning to the room, holding Catherine Montgomery's cold hand. The only response was the constant beep of the monitors. What would you sacrifice for someone you love? How far would you go when all conventional paths lead to dead ends? 3 weeks later, Alara was juggling 2 waitressing jobs while drowning in medical bills. Tonight's gig was different. A high-end charity function in a Beacon Hill mansion where Boston's elite gathered to feel good about themselves while drinking $1,000 champagne. Remember, don't make eye contact unless spoken to, the catering manager hissed as he adjusted Alara's bow tie. These people don't want to know you exist unless you're refilling their glasses. Alara nodded, balancing a tray of crystal flutes. The grand ballroom sparkled under vintage chandeliers, the air heavy with expensive perfume and privilege. How many piano lessons could one of these necklaces pay for? How many months of her mother's treatment would a single painting on these walls cover? She navigated through the crowd, invisible as instructed, until a sudden collision sent champagne flying. The golden liquid splashed across an emerald green dress that probably cost more than 6 months of Alara's rent. I'm so sorry, Alara gasped, mortified as the room seemed to freeze around them. Instead of the expected outburst, the woman, tall, elegant, with sharp cheekbones and calculating eyes, merely raised an eyebrow. Well, at least it wasn't red wine. Her name was Vivian Chase. While the staff hurriedly dried her dress, she studied Alara with unusual intensity. What's your name, girl? Alara Montgomery, ma'am. You're not from service staff stock, are you? Your posture, your diction. Vivian circled her like a predator. You play an instrument, I'm guessing. Strings? No, piano. Alara's surprise must have shown on her face. Your hands, Vivian explained, nodding toward Alara's fingers. They tell stories. Later, as the party dwindled, Vivian cornered Alara in the kitchen. You need money, don't you? Desperately. It wasn't a question. Alara stiffened. We all need money, Miss Chase. Not like you do. I see hunger in your eyes. Not for food, but for salvation. Vivian pulled out a business card. Heavy stock, minimalist design. Just a phone number embossed in purple. The Amethyst Club is hosting a special event Friday night. One evening of your time could solve problems that would otherwise take years. What kind of event? Alara asked, her throat suddenly dry. Vivian's red lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Let's call it a meet and greet for exceptional young women and men who appreciate uniqueness. Virgin territory, so to speak. The card felt heavy in Alara's palm. Was this a joke? A trap? But Vivian's next words cut through her hesitation. The starting bid would easily cover $250,000. Tax-free. Cash. No questions asked. $250,000. Exactly what Dr. Levine had mentioned. Was this coincidence, or had Vivian somehow researched her? And more importantly, did it matter? Think about it, Vivian said, already walking away. But not too long. Some opportunities only knock once, and some mothers don't have the luxury of time. That night, Alara sat beside her sleeping mother, the purple card burning a hole in her pocket. What choices do you make when all options are terrible? What pieces of yourself are you willing to sell when the alternative is watching someone you love die? Newport in September carried a distinct melancholy, summer's last gasp before autumn claimed the Rhode Island coastline. The mansion stood imperiously at the end of a private drive, its limestone facade glowing amber in the sunset. Alara clutched her small overnight bag, palms sweating through the thin fabric. Second thoughts are for people with options, Vivian remarked coolly as she guided Alara through massive oak doors. Remember what I told you. Speak only when spoken to. Maintain eye contact, but never challenge. And above all, remember why you're here. The preparation had been meticulous. The past 48 hours had been a blur of contracts, non-disclosure agreements, medical examinations, and a makeover that transformed Alara from exhausted waitress to ethereal ingenue. The white silk gown they'd selected clung to her frame, making her feel simultaneously powerful and utterly vulnerable. This is real, isn't it? Alara whispered as a stylist applied the finishing touches to her hair. People actually do this? Vivian's reflection appeared behind her in the mirror. The wealthy have different appetites, darling. Some collect art, others collect experiences. You're simply a rare commodity in a market of abundance. The Venetian mask, delicate, adorned with crystals and feathers, was the final touch. As Vivian secured it to her face, Alara felt her identity slipping away, replaced by something both less and more than herself. Was this her bottom, or merely a way station on a descent that had no end? Lot 7, Vivian informed her. Lucky number. The Amethyst Club never forgets its investments. You'll be cared for, regardless of tonight's outcome. The ballroom fell silent as Alara was led to the small stage. 50 men and women in various disguises watched from tables illuminated by nothing but purple candles, creating a surreal, almost religious atmosphere. Somewhere, a cello played Bach, the notes hanging mournfully in the air. Gentlemen and ladies of the Amethyst Club, we present Lot 7, announced a disembodied voice. 22 years old, classically trained pianist, untouched, and certified pure. Bidding begins at $100,000. The first bid came immediately, then another, and another. Numbers climbed with dizzying speed while Alara stood motionless, her mind floating somewhere above her body. Was this still her life? Or had she stepped into some dark fairy tale where young women were traded like exotic birds? 500,000. The voice cut through the competitive murmurs, deep, authoritative, brooking no argument. From the shadows at the back, a tall figure had risen. Unlike the others, his mask was simple black, covering only his eyes. His presence seemed to command the room. Going once, the auctioneer intoned. No one challenged. Going twice, the silence deepened. Sold to Mr. Blackwood for $500,000. Only then did Alara feel her knees weakening. $500,000. For one night. For her. The thought made her vision blur at the edges. Vivian appeared at her elbow, guiding her off the stage. Congratulations, she whispered. Thorne Blackwood never attends these events. You must have made quite an impression. Thorne Blackwood. The name triggered vague recognition. Tech billionaire, reclusive, notorious for cutthroat business tactics. Don't look so terrified. The mysterious ones are usually the most gentle. Vivian adjusted Alara's mask. Just remember our agreement. No names, no personal details, no promises. By tomorrow, this will feel like nothing but a strange dream. They were escorted through a side door to the mansion's private dock, where a sleek yacht waited, its decks illuminated with subtle lighting. The Imperator, Vivian announced. Your chariot for the evening. As they approached the gangway, Alara's steps faltered. I don't think I can do this. Vivian's grip on her arm tightened painfully. You can and you will. Your mother's treatment has already been arranged. There's no turning back now. At the top of the gangway stood the man himself, Thorne Blackwood, mask removed, his angular face expressionless as he watched her approach. Dark hair, sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to calculate her worth with mathematical precision. Mr. Blackwood, Vivian effused. May I present? That will be all, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. You may go. With a final squeeze of Alara's hand, Vivian retreated, leaving her alone with the stranger who had purchased her virginity for the price of her mother's life. What do you say to a man who has bought you? What words exist for such a moment? The Imperator sliced through dark waters, leaving Newport's glittering shoreline behind. Alara stood on the deck, the sea breeze tugging at her gown, while Blackwood observed her from a distance. His silence felt heavier than any words could have been. Would you like to see inside? He finally asked, gesturing toward the cabin door. His voice was deep but unexpectedly soft, lacking the arrogance she'd anticipated. The yacht's interior was a study in understated luxury, polished mahogany, cream leather, and subtle lighting that cast a warm glow over everything. No garish displays of wealth, just quiet confidence in its own magnificence. Drink. Blackwood moved to a small bar, his movements precise and economical. No, thank you. Alara's voice emerged as a whisper. She remained standing, unsure of protocol in this bizarre situation. Were there etiquette rules for being purchased? Please sit. He indicated a plush sofa. The mask, you can remove it now. Alara's fingers trembled as she untied the ribbons. Without its protection, she felt naked, exposed in ways that had nothing to do with her body. So, he said, studying her unveiled face, Vivian's latest acquisition. I'm not an acquisition, she replied reflexively, immediately regretting her defiance. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth curved slightly. No? What would you call it then? What would she call it? A desperate gamble? A soul-crushing necessity? A transaction? She finally answered. Honest. I appreciate that. He settled into an armchair opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance. Tell me about yourself. I thought. No personal details. Isn't that the rule? My money, my rules. His gaze was direct, unwavering. Why are you here, really? The question, so simple, so impossible to answer fully, broke something in her. Perhaps it was his tone, lacking both judgment and lechery. Perhaps it was the accumulated strain of the past months. Whatever the cause, Alara felt tears welling, then spilling over before she could control them. I'm sorry, she managed, mortified, turning away to hide her face. This isn't. I don't usually. When she dared look back, Blackwood's expression had transformed entirely. Gone was the cool assessment, replaced by something that looked remarkably like pain. He was staring at her tears as though they were speaking a language only he understood. Your mother is ill, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alara froze. How did you? I make it my business to know things. He stood abruptly, walking to the window to stare out at the darkness. Experimental treatment? Insurance denial? Medical bankruptcy looming. Her silence confirmed his suspicions. And Vivian found you. She always knows where to look for desperation. His voice had grown hard. What did she promise you? That it would be just one night? That you'd never have to see the buyer again? That you could wash it all away afterward? Something like that, Alara admitted, confusion replacing fear. This wasn't following the script she'd imagined. Blackwood turned back to her, his expression unreadable. I'm going to make you a different offer. I don't understand. This, he gestured between them, isn't happening tonight. Or ever. Relief flooded her, immediately followed by panic. But the money, my mother's treatment, will be taken care of, he finished. But not like this. He crossed to a desk, retrieved a folder, and placed it before her. A contract. 1 year as my personal assistant. Salary of $300,000, with health benefits extending to immediate family. Housing provided. First installment paid immediately. Alara stared at the document, certain she was misunderstanding. Why would you? Because I don't buy women, he said sharply. And because those tears tell me everything I need to know about your character. You can tell my character from my tears. The absurdity almost made her laugh. I can tell you're here against your own will, but driven by love. That makes you loyal, determined, and principled. Qualities I value in an assistant. Was this another type of trap? A different kind of ownership? What game was this man playing? What would this job actually entail? She asked cautiously. Exactly what it says. Scheduling, correspondence, travel arrangements. Nothing inappropriate. And if I refuse? His expression hardened. Then I call your bluff. Walk away tonight with nothing. How desperate are you? Elara Montgomery from Juilliard. The use of her name and school sent a chill through her. He really had done his research. Why go through the auction then? Why not just offer me a job? For the first time, Blackwood looked genuinely uncomfortable. I have my reasons for attending Amethyst Club events. Reasons that don't concern you. Dawn was breaking as they returned to harbor, the contract signed, the first payment already transferred to Alara's account. As she prepared to disembark, Blackwood handed her a business card. My driver will collect you Thursday morning. Pack for Nantucket. Season's ending, so it'll be quiet. Good place to start. Alara studied his face in the morning light. Handsome, guarded, and carrying secrets she couldn't begin to decipher. Why me? She asked, the question that had burned in her mind all night. Because sometimes saving one person is the only redemption possible, he answered cryptically. Thursday, Ms. Montgomery. Don't be late. Nantucket in late September felt like a town exhaling. The summer people had departed, leaving behind empty beaches and quiet streets. As the sleek black SUV wound along the coastal road, Alara pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, watching gray waves crash against the shore. 2 days had passed in a blur. Her mother transferred to Boston's prestigious Whitmore Clinic, specialists consulted, treatment scheduled, all without Alara lifting a finger beyond signing authorization forms. Almost there, miss, the driver announced, turning onto a private road flanked by wind-twisted trees. The Blackwood estate appeared suddenly around a bend, a sprawling shingle-style mansion perched on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. Not ostentatious like Newport's gilded monstrosities, but undeniably commanding, with weathered grace that suggested generations of quiet wealth. Welcome to Windward, said a stern-faced woman waiting at the entrance. 60s, iron gray hair pulled into a tight bun, spine straight as a ruler. I'm Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper. Mr. Blackwood is in New York until tomorrow. I'll show you to your quarters. Alara followed her through the house, trying not to gawk at the understated elegance. Hardwood floors softened by antique rugs, walls adorned with seascapes and nautical maps, windows everywhere capturing the dramatic ocean view. No photos, she noticed. No personal touches suggesting the man who owned it all. Her quarters turned out to be a suite larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with her mother. A sitting room with a small fireplace opened to a bedroom with a 4-poster bed and adjoining bathroom of gleaming marble. Dinner is at 7, Mrs. Winters informed her. Business attired during working hours. Mr. Blackwood values punctuality. Left alone, Alara sank onto the window seat, overwhelmed. Just days ago, she'd been balancing waitressing shifts between hospital visits. Now she was in a mansion that belonged in a period drama, employed by a man she barely knew, who'd spent $500,000 apparently just to rescue her from her own desperate choice. People don't just do that, a voice whispered in her head. There's always a price. Dinner was a solitary affair in a formal dining room that could seat 20. Mrs. Winters served each course with military precision, answering Alara's attempts at conversation with clipped monosyllables. How long have you worked for Mr. Blackwood? Alara tried. Long enough, came the frosty reply. And is he here often? Mr. Blackwood maintains residences in several locations. His schedule is not your concern unless he makes it so. By the third uncomfortable exchange, Alara gave up, focusing instead on the admittedly delicious food. After dinner, restless energy drove her to explore. The East Wing contained offices, locked, and a library that made her breath catch. Floor-to-ceiling shelves housed thousands of volumes, while a bay window created a reading nook complete with cushioned window seat. And there, in the corner, a piano. Not just any piano, but a Steinway Grand, its lid closed like a sleeping giant. Without conscious thought, Alara found herself seated at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys. Would anyone hear? Would it matter if they did? The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room, tentative at first, then gaining confidence. She closed her eyes, letting muscle memory take over, pouring weeks of stress and fear into the music. Opus 9, number 2. Interesting choice. Alara's hands crashed onto the keys in discord. Thorne Blackwood stood in the doorway, still wearing a travel coat, watching her with an unreadable expression. "I'm sorry," she stammered, rising quickly. "I didn't ask permission. Don't stop on my account." He removed his coat, draping it over a chair. "You played beautifully. I thought you weren't returning until tomorrow. Plans change." He moved to a cabinet, poured amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. "Please, continue." Under his watchful gaze, Alara hesitantly resumed playing, choosing Bach this time, structured, mathematical, less emotionally revealing. Blackwood settled into a leather armchair, eyes closed, listening with such intensity she could almost feel it like a physical touch. When she finished, he remained silent for so long she wondered if he'd fallen asleep. "Your technique is flawless," he finally said, "but you're holding back." "Excuse me. With Chopin, you played from the heart. With Bach, you're just hitting notes." Alara bristled. "I wasn't aware I was auditioning." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Defensive. "Interesting." He stood, approaching the piano. "Tomorrow we start work. 8 a.m. sharp. My office is across from the library." As he passed, the scent of his cologne, something woodsy and expensive, momentarily surrounded her. For an instant, their eyes met, and Alara glimpsed something unexpected in his gaze. Not desire or appraisal, but recognition, as though he'd seen something in her that resonated with something in himself. Then his phone rang, breaking the moment. "Blackwood," he answered sharply, striding from the room, already immersed in business jargon. Alone again, Alara ran her fingers lightly over the piano keys. What was she doing here, really? What did Thorne Blackwood actually want from her? And why did she feel like she'd just passed some test she hadn't known she was taking? Later, lying in bed listening to the distant crash of waves, Alara wondered about the man whose house she now occupied. A man who spent fortunes on auctions only to reject the prize, who recognized classical compositions by ear, who saw through her musical defenses with disturbing ease. What secrets lay behind those penetrating eyes? And more importantly, were they secrets she could safely uncover? 3 weeks into her strange employment, Alara had settled into an unexpected rhythm. Mornings meant coffee with Mrs. Winters, who had thawed marginally after discovering Alara's habit of making her own bed despite housekeeping. Days were filled with organizing Blackwood's chaotic schedule, fielding calls from executives too intimidated to approach him directly, and preparing briefings on companies he was considering acquiring. Thorne himself remained an enigma, present yet distant, demanding yet surprisingly patient when she made mistakes. He rarely mentioned the circumstances of their meeting, treating her with professional courtesy that occasionally, bewilderingly, verged on respect. "You'll need formal attire for tomorrow," he announced, striding into the office where Alara was cataloging contracts. "We're attending the Whitmore Clinic benefit in Boston." She looked up, startled. "We? Problem?" His eyebrow arched. "That's my mother's hospital. I'm aware." He dropped a folder on her desk. "The Blackwood Foundation is a major donor. You'll accompany me as my assistant. Your background in music will be useful. These events always feature painful performances requiring polite conversation afterward." The implication that she would see her mother registered belatedly. "Thank you." He waved away her gratitude. "Your performance merits the reward. You've reorganized systems my previous 3 assistants couldn't comprehend." That night, as she tried on the designer dress that had appeared mysteriously in her closet, midnight blue, elegantly simple, Alara studied her reflection. The dark circles under her eyes had faded. Regular meals had restored some fullness to her face. Even her hair shone again, falling in soft waves past her shoulders. Boston's Hawthorne Hotel ballroom glittered with wealth and influence. Alara moved slightly behind Thorne, notebook in hand, the perfect professional shadow. His social persona surprised her, charming when necessary, commanding without effort, navigating conversations with strategic precision. Thorne Blackwood. The prodigal returns to society. The voice cut through the pleasant chatter, carrying an undercurrent of hostility. Its owner, a handsome man in his 40s with salt and pepper hair, approached with predatory grace. "Maxwell," Thorne acknowledged coolly. "I wasn't aware the Whitmore still accepted your donations after the insider trading allegations." Maxwell's smile tightened. "All dismissed, as you well know. Who's your lovely companion?" "My assistant, Ms. Montgomery." Maxwell took her hand, holding it longer than necessary. Assistant? How disappointingly professional. Thorne used to have more interesting taste in companions. Something dangerous flashed in Thorne's eyes. Ms. Montgomery, would you mind getting me a scotch? Neat. The dismissal was transparent, but Alara was grateful for escape. At the bar, she glanced back to see the men engaged in tense conversation, Maxwell leaning in with a smirk while Thorne's face hardened to granite. Those two have history, remarked the bartender, following her gaze. Old partners turned rivals. Rumor has it they nearly destroyed each other over some deal gone bad. When she returned with the drink, Thorne was alone, his composure restored but tension radiating from his rigid shoulders. Everything all right? She ventured. Fine. He drained half the scotch in one swallow. You have 30 minutes to visit your mother. I've arranged private access. Meet me back here for the foundation announcements. The moment with her mother was bittersweet. Catherine looked stronger, her color improved, but the experimental treatment left her exhausted. He seems intimidating. Your new boss, she murmured as Alara described her job in carefully edited highlights. He is, Alara admitted. But also, not what I expected. Her mother's knowing smile proved she was still perceptive despite her illness. Just be careful, sweetheart. Men with that much power usually want something in return. Returning to the ballroom, Alara paused outside, mahogany doors left slightly ajar, recognizing Thorne's voice from a side room. Investigating you for months, he was saying, voice low and hard. The Amethyst Club isn't just your personal playground, Maxwell. I know what happens to this specialty merchandise after your private auctions. Accusations without evidence are just hot air, Thorne. Though I'm curious, why the personal interest? Your new assistant, perhaps? She seems unusually refined for her position. Stay away from her. This is between us. Nothing is just between us anymore. Not since Vienna. Alara backed away quietly, heart pounding. Investigation? The Amethyst Club? What merchandise were they discussing? And what had happened in Vienna? The gala's remainder passed in a blur. During the drive back to Nantucket, Thorne remained silent, staring out at the darkness, shoulders rigid with unspoken tension. That night, unable to sleep, Alara slipped into the library. The computer there was mostly used for cataloging books, but it had internet access. She hesitated only briefly before typing. Maxwell Reeves Thorne Blackwood Vienna scandal. The search yielded financial articles from 8 years prior. Something about a collapsed investment in biotech, accusations of stolen research, a lawsuit settled out of court. Nothing that explained the visceral hatred she'd witnessed. Her next search, Amethyst Club Boston, returned nothing but advertisements for crystal healing and jewelry stores. Midnight research isn't part of your job description. She jumped, heart lodging in her throat. Thorne stood in the doorway, wearing a t-shirt and pajama pants, looking younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. I couldn't sleep, she managed. Curiosity can be dangerous, Alara. He moved closer, glancing at the screen she hadn't managed to close. Especially about things that don't concern you. You were arguing about the club where we met, she countered. That does concern me. Something shifted in his expression, respect mingled with wariness. There are things you're better off not knowing. Because you're investigating them? Are you some kind of undercover agent? A startled laugh escaped him. Hardly. Just a man with unfinished business. He closed the browser window with a decisive click. Go to bed, Alara. And remember, some mysteries aren't yours to solve. As she brushed past him toward the door, his hand caught her wrist, surprisingly gentle. Be careful around Maxwell Reeves. If he approaches you, tell me immediately. Their eyes locked, and for one breathless moment, Alara felt the strange current that sometimes sparked between them. Not quite attraction, not quite fear, but something equally powerful. What are you really doing, Thorne? She whispered. Trying to right an old wrong, he answered, releasing her. Now go, before I say more than I should. Morning fog clung to the Nantucket shoreline like a burial shroud, obscuring the boundary between sea and sky. Alara jogged along the private beach below windward, her thoughts as turbulent as the gray waves crashing beside her. 2 months had passed since the Boston Gala. 2 months of building something that felt almost like trust between her and Thorne. Their working relationship had evolved into a quietly efficient partnership. He'd come to rely on her judgment, even seeking her opinion on business matters outside her expertise. Sometimes in the evenings, they would share the library, he with financial reports, she with books from his extensive collection. Occasionally, they spoke of music, the one subject that consistently animated him beyond business concerns. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. Ms. Montgomery called Mrs. Winters from the deck, interrupting her reflections. Mr. Blackwood requires you in his study immediately. Something in the housekeeper's tone sent alarm bells ringing. The woman had gradually warmed to Alara over the months, even sharing occasional insights into Thorne's habits and preferences. Today, her face was carefully blank. In the study, Thorne stood at the window, back to the door, silhouette rigid against the misty morning light. "You wanted to see me?" Alara asked, closing the door behind her. When he turned, the cold fury in his eyes made her physically step backward. "Explain," he said simply, tossing a manila envelope onto the desk between them. Inside were photographs, surveillance quality, slightly grainy. Alara recognized herself meeting with Vivian Chase at a cafe in Boston 3 days ago, during what was supposed to be a shopping trip for office supplies. The images showed them in intense conversation, one capturing Vivian passing her a slip of paper. "You've been reporting to her." Not a question, but an accusation delivered with quiet devastation. "It's not what it looks like," Alara began, the cliché tasting bitter on her tongue. "No." His laugh was harsh. "Because it looks like my assistant has been feeding information to a woman connected to the very organization I've been investigating." "Investigating for what?" Alara countered, finding her voice. "You've never told me what this is all about." "Yes, I met with Vivian. She contacted me, said it was urgent. And naturally, you kept this meeting secret from me." "I didn't think." "That's obvious." He picked up another photo, this one showing Alara pocketing the paper Vivian had given her. "What's on the note, Alara?" She hesitated, which was answer enough for him. "I trusted you." The quiet disappointment in his voice cut deeper than his anger. "I brought you into my home, gave you access to my files, my schedule, my private communications." "Thorne, please, just let me explain." "Don't." He held up a hand. "The car will take you to Boston this afternoon. Your personal belongings will be packed and forwarded. Your final paycheck includes the remainder of the year's salary, as contracted." The clinical detachment in his voice made her stomach clench. "You're firing me without even hearing my side." "Your side." Finally, emotion cracked through his control, raw, wounded betrayal. "I saved you from that auction, paid for your mother's treatment, gave you a position far beyond your qualifications. And this is how you repay me. By meeting once with the woman who originally put me in that situation? Yes, I should have told you. But you've kept me in the dark about everything. The investigation, your history with Maxwell, why you were at that auction in the first place. Because I was trying to protect you." He slammed his hand against the desk, making her jump. "The less you knew, the safer you were." The admission hung between them, shifting the air in the room. "Safer from what?" she asked quietly. He turned away, composure reasserted with visible effort. "It doesn't matter now. Whatever game you're playing with Vivian Chase, you'll play it elsewhere. We're done." Something broke inside Alara. Pride, perhaps, or the fragile hope she'd nursed that what was building between them might be more than employer and employee. "Fine," she said, voice steady despite the tears threatening. "But for the record, Vivian contacted me because she's being blackmailed by Maxwell Reeves. She's terrified. The note has an address where she claims he keeps records of all the Amethyst Club transactions. She thought I might be able to convince you to help her. She placed her security pass on the desk. Goodbye, Mr. Blackwood. I hope whatever crusade you're on is worth the collateral damage." The drive to Boston passed in a blur of silent tears and angry self-recrimination. Had she really expected him to trust her over evidence that admittedly looked damning? Had she been naive to think their connection meant something beyond professional convenience? In Boston, instead of going directly to her mother's apartment, Alara made an impulsive decision. The address on Vivian's note led to an upscale office building in the financial district. After everything, didn't she deserve to know what this was all about? Security was minimal on a Sunday. Using the building directory, she located Reeves Consulting on the top floor. The elevator required a keycard, but a friendly-looking man in a suit held the door for her with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Too late." She recognized him from the gala, one of Maxwell's associates. "Ms. Montgomery," he said pleasantly as the doors closed. "Mr. Reeves has been hoping you'd accept his invitation." Though we expected Mr. Blackwood to be more difficult to separate from his new pet project, cold realization washed over her. She'd walked straight into a trap. "I don't know what you're talking about," she tried, reaching for the elevator buttons. "Oh, I think you do." His hand closed around her wrist, suddenly steel-strong. "You see, Mr. Reeves has questions about exactly what Thorne Blackwood has told you about our little club." The last thing Alara saw before the needle pricked her neck was his bland smile, transforming into something predatory. "Don't worry," he said as darkness claimed her. "You're still quite valuable merchandise." Consciousness returned in fragments. The scratch of rough fabric against her cheek, the distant hum of industrial equipment, the throbbing ache at the base of her skull. Alara forced her eyes open, blinking against disorientation. The room swayed, then gradually settled into focus. Concrete floors, brick walls, high windows filtering weak light through wire-reinforced glass. "She's awake," a female voice observed, matter of fact. Alara struggled to sit up, discovering her hands were zip-tied in front of her. The plastic cut into her wrists when she pulled against the restraints. "Don't bother," the voice continued. "They check them every hour." Across the small room, a woman sat against the wall, early 30s, hollow-cheeked, but with defiant eyes. "I'm Cassie. You're the new girl. Where are we?" Alara's voice emerged as a croak. "Old textile factory in Providence. Reeves uses it for storage when merchandise becomes complicated." Cassie's bitter smile spoke volumes. "Welcome to the Real Amethyst Club." The room contained nothing but two thin mattresses on the floor and a bucket in the corner. No windows within reach, one metal door with a small observation panel. Institutional. Efficient. Terrifying. "How long have you been here?" Alara asked, trying to piece together some sense of what was happening. 3 weeks, give or take. I lost track." Cassie stretched her legs, revealing similar restraints around her ankles. "I was lot 4 at an auction in New York. Buyer got cold feet when he realized I wasn't exactly there willingly. Reeves doesn't like refunds." Cold fear settled in Alara's stomach. "They're human traffickers, among other things." Cassie's laughter held no humor. "The auctions are just the public face, exclusive events for rich perverts with specific tastes. The real money's in moving girls internationally. Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, private islands with no extradition." The room tilted again as the implications hit her. This was what Thorne had been investigating, what he'd tried to shield her from, and she'd walked straight into it, driven by hurt pride and wounded feelings. "Someone will come looking for me," Alara said, more to herself than to Cassie. "Blackwood?" Cassie raised an eyebrow at Alara's startled expression. "They talk about you. Blackwood's pet project. Reeves has been obsessed with getting to him through you for weeks." Before Alara could process this, the door scraped open. Maxwell Reeves himself entered, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that looked obscenely out of place in their squalid surroundings. "Ms. Montgomery, apologies for the accommodations." His smile never reached his cold eyes. "Merely temporary, I assure you." She met his gaze steadily, refusing to show fear. "What do you want?" "Direct." "I appreciate that." He pulled a folding chair from the hallway, positioning it carefully before sitting. "What I want is quite simple. Information about Thorne Blackwood's investigation into my business interests." "I don't know anything about any investigation." His expression turned pitying. "Come now. You've been his shadow for months. Accessing his files, handling his correspondence, practically living in his pocket." He leaned forward. "What evidence has he collected? Who is he working with? FBI? Private security?" The questions confirmed what she'd pieced together from overheard conversations and half-truths. Thorne wasn't just investigating. He was building a case. "He doesn't confide in me," she insisted. "I'm just his assistant." Maxwell studied her face. "You really don't know, do you? How interesting." He stood, straightening his cuffs. "No matter. Your value isn't in what you know, but in what Blackwood feels for you." Alarm bells rang in her mind. "What are you talking about?" "I've known Thorne since he was a brash young entrepreneur with more ambition than sense. He hides it well, but he's painfully predictable in one respect. He develops attachments. Inconvenient, messy attachments to people he thinks need saving." Maxwell circled behind her, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. 8 years ago in Vienna, it was a brilliant young scientist whose research I acquired through unconventional means. Thorne's attempt to play White Knight ended in tragedy. His testimony nearly destroyed me, but evidence has a way of disappearing when the right palms are greased. He gripped Alara's shoulders, making her flinch. Now it's you. The damsel he rescued from the auction block. He fired you, yes? Cast you out when he thought you'd betrayed him? Yet I guarantee he's already regretting it, already mobilizing to find you. You're using me as bait, she realized. Smart girl. Maxwell stepped back. He's been building a case for months. Electronic surveillance, financial traces, witness testimony. But he's made one critical mistake. He's allowed himself to care. When we dangle you as the prize, he'll come himself rather than risk your safety with authorities. And when he does, he let the implication hang in the air. He won't come, Alara said, trying to sound convinced. I was just an employee. A charity case. Maxwell laughed. You don't believe that any more than I do. I've had you both watch for months. The way he looks at you when he thinks no one sees, it's almost touching. After he left, Alara slumped against the wall, mind racing. Had there been something growing between her and Thorne beyond professional respect? Those quiet evenings in the library, the subtle ways he'd found to show he valued her, were those merely kindnesses to a woman he pitied or signs of deeper feelings? And if Maxwell was right, if Thorne did care enough to come for her, she was leading him straight into a trap. Don't beat yourself up, Cassie said, breaking the silence. Reeves is a master manipulator. It's how he lures girls to the auctions, how he keeps his clients loyal, how he stayed ahead of law enforcement for years. Alara examined the zip ties binding her wrists, searching for weaknesses. We need to get out of here. And go where? This building is surrounded by empty warehouses. Guards patrol every exit. I don't care. Determination replaced fear in Alara's voice. I won't be the bait that destroys the one person who tried to protect me. As night fell, bringing deeper shadows to their prison, Alara noticed something she'd missed before. Pipes running along the ceiling, remnants of the building's industrial past. And where there were pipes, there might be sound systems. Cassie, she whispered. This was a textile factory, right? Would they have had PA systems to communicate across the floor? Probably. What? Alara stared at the pipes, an idea forming. Because if Thorne does come, I need to warn him. And I think I know how. Retry. 48 hours passed in a timeless blur. Guards brought meager meals, changed the waste bucket, and occasionally took Alara for interviews with Maxwell's associates. Men who asked repetitive questions about Thorne's investigation while she feigned ignorance. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the clang of metal doors and distant machinery. On the third day, everything changed. The factory hummed with unusual activity, raised voices, hurried footsteps, radio static. Through the observation panel, Alara glimpsed armed men taking positions. Something's happening, Cassie whispered, pressing her ear to the door. They're moving equipment out. Sounds like they're preparing to relocate. Dread pooled in Alara's stomach. He's coming. Thorne is coming, and they're ready for him. During her last interview, she'd managed to confirm her theory about the factory's PA system. The building retained its original infrastructure, including speakers throughout the main floor. All she needed was access to the control room, which might as well have been on another planet given their confinement. A sudden commotion erupted outside, shouting, followed by a dull thud. The observation panel darkened as someone peered in, then the door swung open. A guard she hadn't seen before entered, his movements tense. Get up, he ordered. Reeves wants you moved to the secondary location. Why? Alara stalled, mind racing. What's happening? Just move. He pulled her roughly to her feet. As he leaned down to check her restraints, Alara noticed something odd, a small earpiece with a blue light. None of Maxwell's men used such equipment. Taking the biggest gamble of her life, she whispered, Are you with Thorne? The guard's eyes flicked to hers, widening slightly before his professional mask returned. The barest nod confirmed her guess. 2 minutes, he murmured, cutting her zip ties with a concealed knife. Stay down when it starts. He led her and Cassie into the corridor, maintaining a convincing facade of rough handling whenever they passed surveillance cameras. They descended a service stairwell to a lower level filled with obsolete machinery, dusty looms, and control panels. The main floor is ahead, he explained quietly. Reeves has men positioned throughout, expecting a frontal assault. Our team is creating a diversion at the loading docks while we extract you through the east exit. Where's Thorne? Alara demanded. The guard's hesitation told her everything. On site. Against protocol. Of course he was. Maxwell had read him perfectly, too proud, too driven by personal vendetta to stay safely removed. I need the PA control room, Alara said suddenly. That's not the plan. They're expecting him. This is a trap. She gripped the guard's arm. The control room. Where is it? Something in her intensity must have convinced him. Administrative section, second floor. But it's too risky. 2 minutes, she echoed his earlier words. That's all I need. The diversion came right on schedule. A series of explosions from the loading area that shook dust from the rafters. Alarms blared as Maxwell's security team responded to the apparent breach. In the confusion, their guard led them up a different stairwell to a corridor of offices. Control room, he indicated, unlocking a door with a security card. Be quick. The small room housed an ancient control panel, analog dials, switches, and a microphone that had probably last been used in the 80s. Alara scanned the labels, finding the master switch for the factory floor speakers. What's your plan? Cassie asked, keeping watch at the door. Sound. Alara answered, examining the panel. Something only Thorne would recognize as a warning. Her years of musical training had given her perfect pitch and an encyclopedic memory for compositions. The piece she needed was embedded in her muscle memory, the one she'd been playing when Thorne first heard her at the piano in his Nantucket library. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. But how to translate piano music through an ancient PA system? The answer came as she spotted a metal toolbox beneath the desk. Inside were basic maintenance tools, including a small hammer. Alara grabbed it, then turned to the metal panel housing the speaker controls. What are you doing? Cassie hissed. Making a piano. Alara positioned herself, raising the hammer. When I start, flip that red switch to activate all speakers. She closed her eyes, mentally placing each note of Chopin's composition. Then, with precise timing and controlled force, she began tapping the metal panel. Each strike produced a resonant tone that echoed slightly differently, depending on where the hammer hit. It wasn't perfect, no subtlety of touch, no pedaling, but the distinctive melody emerged, recognizable to anyone who knew the piece well. Cassie flipped the switch, and Alara's improvised percussion filled the factory. 3 floors below, Thorne Blackwood froze in the middle of giving instructions to his extraction team. The metallic, haunting rendition of Chopin filtering through the ancient speakers was unmistakable. Both the piece and the deliberate pattern of notes that could only come from a trained pianist. It's her, he murmured, attention shifting to the source of the sound. She's warning us. In the building's eastern quadrant, Maxwell Reeves frowned at the strange musical intrusion. What the hell is that? Shut it down. But the damage was done. Thorne's team, alerted to the trap, altered their approach. Instead of entering through the main floor where Maxwell's men waited, they breached through maintenance tunnels, quickly neutralizing resistance with non-lethal tactics. The control room door burst open as the musical message reached its crescendo. Alara whirled, hammer raised defensively, then dropped it when she recognized Thorne himself, disheveled, wearing tactical gear, his expression transforming from fierce determination to naked relief. Alara. Her name emerged as both question and answer. No time for reunion. Shouting erupted from the stairwell. Thorne grabbed her hand, passing her to another team member. Get them out. Northeast exit. I'll handle Reeves. Thorne, no, Alara protested. It's you he wants. And it's me he'll get. His eyes held hers for one electric moment. I should have trusted you. I'm sorry. Before she could respond, gunfire erupted from below. In the chaos that followed, Alara and Cassie were hustled toward an emergency exit. Looking back, she saw Thorne descending toward the firefight, weapon drawn. The last image before the exit door closed behind them was Maxwell Reeves emerging from the shadows, raising a pistol toward Thorne's unprotected back. The silenced shot echoed in the cavernous space as Alara screamed a warning that came too late. 3 months passed like a dream sequence, blurred at the edges, vivid in moments, time flowing inconsistently. Alara drifted between hospital corridors, federal offices, and quiet hotel rooms under protection details who wouldn't explain what they were protecting her from. Mr. Blackwood's condition has stabilized. The stone-faced agent would report every morning. Nothing more, nothing less. No visits allowed. No direct communication. Just those 6 words that told her only that Thorne was alive, but revealed nothing about his actual state. The bullet had caught him between shoulder and spine, a critical area packed with nerves and major blood vessels. Maxwell's aim had been deliberately placed for maximum damage rather than immediate death. But Reeves hadn't counted on Thorne's team having a former combat medic among them. In the aftermath, the full scope of the Amethyst Club's operations was exposed. Dozens of girls rescued from international trafficking pipelines. Corrupted officials arrested. Offshore accounts frozen. Maxwell Reeves himself vanished during transport to federal custody. Whether through bribery or something more sinister remained unknown. Vivian Chase turned witness for the prosecution, revealing how she'd been coerced into recruitment after her own brief time as merchandise. Her testimony proved crucial in dismantling the remaining network. And Alara's mother, the catalyst for everything, continued her remarkable recovery. The experimental treatment had succeeded beyond expectations. She walked without assistance now, color returned to her cheeks, life plans cautiously resuming. "You can't keep living in limbo," Catherine told her daughter over lunch in her small apartment. "He's had his people taking care of us, paying for everything, but you haven't seen or spoken to him in months. At some point, you need to move forward." Alara pushed salad around her plate. "I can't explain it. We barely knew each other. He was my employer. And yet you can't stop thinking about him," her mother finished gently. "Sometimes connections form in the strangest circumstances, sweetheart." That evening, Alara received an unexpected call. Mrs. Winters, formal as ever but with a new warmth in her voice, delivered a simple message. "Mr. Blackwood asks if you would come to Nantucket tomorrow. The car will collect you at 9. Sleep proved impossible. What would she find? A weakened man bitter from betrayal and injury? A distant employer tying up loose ends? Or something else entirely? Nantucket in January was a different world from her last visit. Windswept, desolate, beautiful in its stark emptiness. Windward stood against the gray sky, waves crashing against the bluff below with winter ferocity. Mrs. Winters met her at the door, offering a slight smile instead of her former frosty appraisal. "He's in the library." The familiar room embraced Alara with unchanged comfort. Books lining the walls, fire crackling in the hearth, ocean visible through rain-streaked windows. And there, seated not in his usual armchair, but in a wheelchair positioned by the piano, was Thorne. Her breath caught. He looked simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than she had imagined. Thinner, paler, but with the same intensity in his gaze as it locked with hers. "You came," he said simply. "Did you think I wouldn't? I wouldn't have blamed you. Not after everything." An awkward silence stretched between them. 3 months of absence and unanswered questions creating an invisible barrier. "Your mother?" he asked finally. "Recovering well. The doctors are amazed." She took a hesitant step forward. "And you?" Thorne glanced down at the wheelchair. "Temporary, they say. Nerve damage takes time to heal." A ghost of his former smile appeared. "I've been a terrible patient. Ask Mrs. Winters." "The worst," the housekeeper confirmed, entering with a tea tray. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as cantankerous." The familiar complaint broke some of the tension. Alara found herself smiling as she accepted a teacup. When Mrs. Winters departed, Thorne wheeled himself closer to where Alara stood. "I owe you an explanation," he began. "You don't owe me anything." "I do." His voice gained conviction. 8 years ago, I met a woman in Vienna, a research scientist developing genetic therapies. She was brilliant, idealistic, and desperate for funding. Maxwell approached her with an offer that seemed legitimate. By the time she realized what he really wanted, patents he could weaponize for biological enhancements, she was trapped. Thorne's hands tightened on the wheelchair arms. "I tried to help her escape. Failed spectacularly. She died in what authorities ruled a suicide but was clearly murder. My testimony wasn't enough to convict him. So you began investigating the Amethyst Club," Alara filled in. "It took years to connect Maxwell to their operations. I attended auctions as a supposed buyer, gathering evidence, building a case." He looked away. "Then you appeared on that stage. Why me?" The question that had haunted her for months. "Out of all the women there, why did you bid on me?" His eyes met hers directly. "Because you reminded me of her." Not physically, but something in your eyes. Intelligence trapped by circumstance. The moment I saw you crying later, I knew I couldn't be part of your exploitation. But I also couldn't simply let you walk away back into poverty and your mother's illness. So you offered me a job instead. Yes, and then committed the cardinal sin of any employer. His smile held self-deprecation. I fell in love with my assistant. The words hung in the air between them, simultaneously shocking and completely unsurprising. When I saw those photographs of you with Vivian, he continued, all my old fears of betrayal resurfaced. I should have trusted you, asked for an explanation. Instead, I pushed you away, directly into danger. You came for me, she reminded him softly. Too late and too recklessly. Alara moved closer, perching on the piano bench beside his wheelchair. Does it matter how the rescue happened if it succeeded? Something vulnerable flashed across his face. Maxwell escaped. The danger isn't completely gone. Is that why you've kept your distance these months? To protect me? Partly. He hesitated. I also needed to be sure what I feel for you isn't just guilt or obligation or hero complex. I needed to know it was real. And is it? Her heart suspended between beats. Yes. The single word carried absolute certainty. But I'm not the man you met anymore. He gestured at the wheelchair. The doctors are optimistic, but recovery will be long. I can't ask you to. Alara silenced him by gently taking his hand. Did you ever consider asking what I want? Outside, the winter storm intensified, waves crashing against the cliffs. Inside, the fire crackled in counterpoint to the rain battering the windows. And between them, something fragile and powerful took shape. Trust reborn from betrayal's ashes. Play for me, Thorne requested softly, nodding toward the piano. The Chopin you used to save my life. As her fingers touched the keys, beginning the familiar nocturne, Alara felt pieces of her fragmented life finally aligning into a new pattern. Not the future she had once imagined at Juilliard, but something unexpected and precious. A composition still being written, note by note, its melody carrying both their voices. 6 months later, she performed that same piece on stage with the Boston Symphony Orchestra, her debut as a featured soloist. And in the front row, walking with a cane but standing tall on his own strength, Thorne watched the woman who had saved him in more ways than one. Their eyes met across the crowded hall, holding a conversation no one else could hear, about darkness overcome, about second chances, about love discovered in the most unlikely circumstances. 1 year to the day after the Providence factory raid, Alara stood at the edge of Windward's cliff, watching gulls dive through salt-laden air. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before her, today's gentle blue belying its winter ferocity. Behind her, the Blackwood estate had transformed from austere retreat to vibrant home. Flowers blooming in gardens once neglected, windows thrown open to catch sea breezes, music flowing freely through rooms that had known too much silence. Penny for your thoughts, came Thorne's voice behind her. She turned to find him approaching along the stone path, his gait still bearing a slight hitch, but growing stronger each month. Physical therapy had restored most of his mobility, though rainy days still brought discomfort that he tried to hide. Just thinking about time, she answered, accepting both his embrace and the mug of coffee he offered. How much can change in a year? His arms encircled her waist as they faced the ocean together. Regrets? Not one. She leaned back against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. You? Only that I wasted so much time trying to fight this. He pressed a kiss to her temple, his former reserve replaced by casual affection that still sometimes surprised her. Mrs. Winters is threatening to quit if we don't finalize the foundation gala details today. Alara laughed. Empty threat. She'd never abandon ship now that she's practically running everything. The Blackwood Foundation for Survivor Recovery had emerged from the ashes of the Amethyst Club case, a multi-million-dollar initiative providing comprehensive support to trafficking survivors. Medical care, housing, education, legal assistance, psychological services, all funded by Thorne's seemingly limitless resources and guided by Alara's instinctive understanding of trauma and healing. Between foundation work and her burgeoning musical career, life had taken on a rhythm neither of them could have anticipated. 3 nights a week, she performed with the Boston Symphony. The remaining days, they split between Nantucket and the Foundation's headquarters, creating new systems to address problems most people preferred to ignore. Inside the house, Alara's phone chimed with the special tone reserved for urgent calls. She hurried to answer, Thorn following with concern etched on his face. "They found him," she said after a brief exchange, setting the phone down with unsteady hands. No elaboration needed. For 12 months, Maxwell Reeves had been a ghost, appearing in surveillance footage in Singapore, Dubai, Buenos Aires, always vanishing before authorities arrived. The continued uncertainty had cast a shadow over their rebuilding, a sword perpetually suspended. "Where?" Thorn asked, voice carefully neutral. "Private island off the Maldives. International waters, but they're coordinating with." She stopped, studying his face. "You already knew." He had the grace to look apologetic. "I received word yesterday. Wanted confirmation before telling you." "We agreed no more secrets," she reminded him, hurt flashing briefly. "Not a secret. A protection." He took her hands. "I know what this means to you. To us, but I needed to be certain before getting your hopes up." The tension dissolved as quickly as it had formed. This was their pattern now, moments of conflict addressed directly rather than allowed to fester, boundaries established and respected even as they sometimes tested each other's limits. "When will they bring him in?" she asked. "That's the thing." Thorn's expression grew troubled. "The extraction team found him already dead. Apparent suicide, though details are sketchy. His security staff disappeared with significant cash reserves." The news hit like a physical blow, not grief, but a complex cocktail of relief, disappointment, and unresolved anger. Maxwell would never face justice in a courtroom, never acknowledge the lives he'd destroyed, never serve a day in prison for his crimes. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "You don't have to know right now." Thorn's hand found the small of her back, grounding her. "Whatever comes up is valid." His understanding wasn't theoretical. Both had learned to navigate emotional minefields during his recovery. Anger at physical limitations, grief for lost independence, fear that their relationship was built on circumstance rather than genuine connection. Those months had forced radical honesty neither had experienced before. Later that evening, after notifying key Foundation staff and making necessary security adjustments, they retreated to the library that had become their sanctuary. While Thorn reviewed reports, Alara sat at the piano, fingers moving without conscious direction. "New composition?" he asked, recognizing unfamiliar patterns emerging amid fragments of Chopin. "Maybe. It's been forming for weeks." She continued playing, eyes half closed. "I'm calling it Aftermath." The piece evolved as she played, beginning with discordant notes that gradually resolved into something unexpectedly hopeful, complex but harmonious. "It's our story," Thorn observed quietly. "Parts of it." Her fingers stilled on the keys. "The Maxwell chapter is closed now, but I keep thinking about the others. Cassie, the girl's still missing. The ones we haven't reached yet." Since the raid, Cassie had become the Foundation's most effective advocate, fierce, articulate, unafraid to challenge authority figures with her first-hand knowledge of trafficking realities. Her testimony had helped convict 12 of Maxwell's associates. "We can't save everyone," Thorn reminded her gently. "I know, but we can try to reach as many as possible." She turned on the bench to face him. "I've been considering the Juilliard offer." The prestigious school had approached her about a special residency program, teaching traumatized youth to use music for healing. It would mean dividing her time between New York and Massachusetts, a logistical challenge they'd been discussing for weeks. "You should take it," he said without hesitation. "Your music reaches people in ways our other programs can't. It would mean more time apart." His smile held certainty that still amazed her. "We've survived worse than commuting, I believe." That night, as moonlight painted silver patterns across their bedroom, Alara traced the scar on Thorn's shoulder, permanent reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything before it truly began. "I never properly thanked you," she murmured. "For what?" "For bidding on me that night." As strange as it sounds, it was the first step toward freedom. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I think we saved each other, if we're being honest." The truth of it settled over them both. From auction block to symphony stage, from wounded vigilante to Foundation director, their paths had transformed in ways neither could have imagined that first night on the yacht. Maxwell's death didn't erase the past, but it removed a persistent threat, allowing them to focus fully on the future. The symphony they were creating together, both literally through Alara's music and figuratively through their shared work, continued to evolve, incorporating both darkness and light, minor keys and major resolutions. As dawn approached, Alara drifted toward sleep with her head on Thorn's chest, his heartbeat a steady rhythm beneath her ear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, foundation decisions, concert preparations, the ongoing work of healing. But for now, in this moment of quiet connection, the melody was perfect. Their unfinished symphony played on, each day adding new notes to a composition neither could have written alone.